All right. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining. My name is Grace McAmoyle, and I'm a Senior Research Coordinator for BHIPP. I will be introducing our presenter for today and facilitating the Q&A at the end of the session. For those of you unfamiliar with BHIPP, I would like to provide some information about our program. Maryland Behavioral Health Integration in Pediatric Primary Care, or BHIP, is a child psychiatry access program that supports the ability of pediatric primary care providers and emergency medicine professionals in addressing and managing the mental health concerns of their patients. BHIP is a free, statewide program that offers telephone consultation, resource and referral networking, telemental health services, and training and educational opportunities. The BHIP Warm Line is staffed by a team of child mental health specialists and is available Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Our phone number and website will be placed in the chat for you. It is my pleasure to introduce today's BHIP webinar, Problematic Gambling, What Can Pediatric Primary Care Providers Do?, presented by Kristen Bell. Kristen earned her master's degree in social work from the University of Maryland, Baltimore School of Social Work, and maintains an LCSW-C with Maryland Board of Social Work Examiners, an International Certified Gambling Counselor II certification with the International Problem Gambling and Gaming Certification Board, and is a Certified Associated Counselor, Alcohol and Drug Specialization, or CAC-AD, with the Maryland Board of Professional Counselors and Therapists. As clinical manager with the Maryland Center of Excellence on Problem Gambling, Kristen provides consultation and technical assistance to organizations and private practitioners integrating evidence-based gambling screening and assessment into their current clinical practice. With over 20 years of experience in behavioral health, Kristen works closely with the center's certified peer recovery specialists and provides clinical training surrounding the topic of gambling disorder. Kristen is dedicated to helping healthcare professionals throughout Maryland understand the importance of having conversations about gambling and incorporating these conversations into their clinical practice. We are very grateful to have you here today. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us during the session, and I will hand it over to Kristen for the webinar.
Thank you, Grace. Thank you, Bethany. And thank you so much for that introduction as well. I saw some social workers also on the call, so that's good to know. So there's no potential conflicts of interest. And then this is information about BHIP and their partners in funding. The center's partner in funding. So the center is a program of the University of Maryland School of Medicine, Baltimore, and is funded by the Department of Maryland Department of Health's Behavioral Health Administration. So the Problem Gambling Fund, that money gets funneled down to BHA, who then, disperses it to us and our other partners. So the center's mission is really to promote healthy and informed choices when it comes to gambling. So we know that most Marylanders have probably gambled at least once in their lifetime. So we want people to engage in gambling activities with healthy and informed choices, recognizing that we want to engage in gambling with money that we can afford to lose. That's not needed for household necessities and things like that, but also that we're a resource for help and hope if people find themselves struggling or having a problem, or maybe on the cusp of developing a gambling disorder. And so our key initiatives and resources is a lot of public awareness. So March is Problem Gambling Awareness Month. So you may see a lot of more advertising, hopefully, from the center, and just more awareness about problematic gambling. March 10th is National Gambling Disorder Screening Day, but we encourage screening all year long. We also have a prevention manager who works with the youth, elderly, and everyone in between. And we also have some prevention grants for special populations as well as colleges and universities. We have a government relations manager who keeps their pulse on public policy as it relates to all things gambling. So if you're interested in advocating and going down to Annapolis and things like that, you can connect with her or even just write a letter to your congressman. We have a research department that primarily does our prevalence study. So I'll be sharing some of that research with you today. We also have free trainings with CEUs. I just did one on Monday about evidence-based screening and assessment. We have one next Monday just on problem Gambling Awareness Month and ways that you can get involved. We have one on the 20th as well about shame and guilt related to gambling. And we have about 3 webinars every month. We're going to have an in-person one in April, and then it all culminates with our annual conference in June, which is now being held at Turf Valley. We have over 100 providers that offer no-cost treatment to Maryland residents. And then we have currently 4 peers certified, all with lived experience in gambling addiction and recovery, and we're looking to hire more. And they're a great reference and resource as well. Oops, I thought I highlighted that. And then always remember, if you don't remember anything from this training, no 1-800-GAMBLER. That's the best way to get in touch with our peers, find a no-cost treatment provider, and just say, hey, what's that number to the center? So what I hope you guys learn today is some of the factors that might increase someone's risk of gambling problematically, the signs and symptoms of gambling disorder, and then using that gold standard from the DSM to formalize the diagnoses. Some evidence-based gambling screening tools, ways to integrate them into your part of your practice and start the conversation. And then I'm going to share a video from something that we did in partnership with Red House called Winning Back My Life, where you can hear a young person that was impacted by gambling disorder and found their way to recovery. So what is gambling? So when we talk about gambling, what does that mean? Well, it's really when someone is betting something or risking something of value based on a chance outcome that is out of their control or influence, with the understanding that they would either gain increased value or lose that original value determined by that specific outcome. So really kind of like, right, you're risking something of value on an unknown outcome. There's this chance risk and then an opportunity for a prize. So what might first come to mind? Which is often why I encourage, if we're going to talk about gambling, is to give that definition and maybe some examples. Because oftentimes providers might be thinking, oh, only casino, but there's also lottery, right? It costs $1 to buy a lottery ticket. Everyone can afford to engage in some type of gambling activity, but they might be doing this at home, right? When they're playing card games or domino or whatever, right? Shuffleboard, darts, for money. There's also electronic gaming machines or slot machines, video lottery terminals. A lot of the bingo halls here in Maryland actually they're often called mini casinos because they have a lot of slot machines. Um, Horse racing, right? I live near Pimlico Raceway, so I know all the traffic that happens in May. Stock market and day trading can be considered forms of gambling based on the definition. Cryptocurrency, loot boxes, and esports. So I'm just gonna tell you what those are. So loot boxes, you may play games on your phone. You may play video games, right? But oftentimes there's this like little chess box. Mine's a gold piggy bank on the game that I play, and it says, "Hey, you can spend a small amount of money, but it's on an unknown outcome." And so using that definition of gambling, it's kind of a gray area. But the research shows that those who are purchasing loot boxes are actually at greater risk of becoming problematic gamers or develop problems with gambling later in life. And then esports is really there. People are turning video gaming into a spectator sport. So you see this image, it's at an arena, right? Where they're paying money to purchase like and watch other people play video games. You have to be 18 to be involved in an esport league. I've heard, I don't know, but College Park may offer scholarships to participate in an esport league, but you actually have to be 21 to wager on the esports. And I also wanted to mention it because of the video games, right? So each video game has a rating, just like movies, right? It's PG, PG-13, rated R. But the A for adults actually has the opportunity to gamble with real money within those games. So just want to make people aware that there's an opportunity to gamble with real money in games that are labeled A for adults only. There's also simulated gambling. I'm not going to get into that too much, but I will touch on a little bit about gaming towards the end. So the legal ages of gambling in Maryland, casino, sports betting, and esports are all 21. Bingo halls, Some are 18, some are 21. That is because some of them do allow sports betting at their brick and mortar locations. Lottery, horse betting, and fantasy sports is 18. However, if you're interested in legislation, there is a bill coming up this legislative session about increasing the age for fantasy sports to 21. So I just want to mention about the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. You might be familiar with this. Our prevention manager, again, really works with the youth a lot uh, more than I do. So she's more familiar with this, but I wanted to share some of the research that they found because they do ask about gambling. So this is for the 22 to 23 year range about high school students who gambled in that past year. And so we see really in our rural areas, greater numbers. So Garrett, Queen Anne, Somerset, right? Greater numbers of high school students are gambling, and the average is about 18% of Maryland high school students are engaging in gambling. And this is kind of the breakdown by year range. And we see that those that are 18 or older are at greater risk of engaging in some type of gambling activity. I will say that that has kind of been the trend, especially with sports betting legalization, right? Like people may not have done an activity because it was illegal, right? I'm not going to do something because it's illegal. Well, now it's legal. And so it gives the impression of maybe there's some type of safety and because there's a legality to this gambling. And so people may be engaging in gambling because I'm not saying that this is sports betting per se, right? But and then a look at our prevalence study. So we do this about every couple of years, and this one was collected, the data was collected from May to July of 2024. And this is what we've seen kind of over the trends over the years, over the prevalence studies, is that have you ever gambled in your lifetime? So again, the majority of Marylanders, almost 90%, have gambled at least once in their lifetime. So it's important that we have these conversations because, have you ever gambled? It's probably yes. And so the prevalence study, about 10% of Marylanders have actually never gambled. They've not participated in any gambling activity in their lifetime. almost 75% are low risk, 9.8% are at risk. And then the problem and probable disordered gambler are what is used to make up that percentage to identify those that might be at risk for disordered gambling. And so they do that with the NODS screening tool. So anyone that really scores a 3 or above on the NODS diagnostic screening tool is going to be considered as having disordered gambling. And so the trends over the years, we do see, I mean, I think almost every prevalence study or any gambling research sees this big spike in 2020. And as we know, this during COVID, right? And so there wasn't much to do, and people may have engaged in gambling activities to relieve boredom, right? But that went down in 2022, but we also now see an increase from 22 to 24 when sports betting has really taken off. So it was legalized in 2021, but didn't get online until 2022. So people were wagering on sports online in 22 when we did our prevalence study, but it wasn't yet legal. And now we see this big bump since it has been legalized. This is just a little bit more about the educational, so the demographics of those that might be at risk or disordered. Again, we see the greatest risk to those with a high school or no diploma. And for the age, for our prevalence study, what we found is those are at greatest risk are those between ages of 35 and 44, but the disordered is 18 to 24 is the highest. Oh, I'm sorry, it's actually 55 to 64. So there's this variation here. I mean, right? And again, it's only asking those that are 18 and over because of the legal ages of gambling. For our sports betting, we see that 40% of Marylanders who bet on sports in the past year exhibit either disordered or at-risk gambling behavior. And we see those that, and the research is showing this everywhere, that if you're engaging in multiple modes of gambling, so here it's saying multiple modes of sports betting, but if you're engaging in more than one form of gambling, it's going to put you at a higher risk of developing a disorder or just put you at risk of developing that disorder. Some of the risk factors for developing, right, things to just make us more susceptible to developing a problem or a disorder. Men are just more likely to be risk takers. But with the spreading of sports betting and even now prediction markets, right? They're targeting women. And so women are greater risk now of developing problems related to gambling because of this targeting advertisement and just the ease of access, right? You don't have to go anywhere to sports bet if you can do it from your phone, from your couch. Our peers often let us know too that a big win is often the most dangerous thing that can happen to someone that has a potential for a problem. It gives this belief and fallacy that maybe I can do that again. And then sometimes people get that big win, and before they know it, they've put it right back into the gambling venue. Being single or divorced, gambling before the legal age. Um, we know that's true with drugs or alcohol, right? We don't want people to engage in those substances right before maybe their brain has been fully developed, right? We want to maybe wait till we're 25. But the legal age for gambling is either 18 or 21. So we want to just try to push that back as far as possible. Having lower socioeconomic status, adverse childhood events, or traumatic events, a family history of gambling disorder or other behavioral health disorders, just a mistaken beliefs about the odds of winning, right? So we know the odds, the house always wins, but the person with the gambling disorder might have this belief of I can beat the house, I have a skill, I have some type of way of doing that. And then also, oh, risk taking or impulsive behavior. So we see that a lot with like our first responders, and military population, but we know adolescents have a history of risk-taking and impulsive behavior. Living near or working at a casino or gambling venue can also put someone at greater risk. And for our adolescents, if a parent has a problem with gambling, right, they're going to see that modeled and learn that behavior. If they've had an earlier age of their first gambling activity, having greater impulsivity, and then other areas of impacted functioning, such as like a medical, psychiatric, substance use disorders, or any family social problems, right? It's sometimes used as a way to escape. And it's often the elephant in the room, right? I'm right there, no one is even acknowledging me. No one's thinking about the harms that might come with gambling. It actually has the highest rate of suicide of all the addictive disorders. About 50% have contemplated, and 17 to 20 have made an attempt. So it can be very dangerous, and people don't really always recognize this. So we want to ask the questions, have the conversation, incorporate evidence-based screening tools. So these are some of the tools that I'm going to go over today. Um, and then there's also self-assessment. So you can always refer people to our Help Seeker website or Gamblers Anonymous, the 12-step program for people in gambling recovery, has a 20 questions, yes or no, that people can answer. So the brief biosocial gambling screen is just 3 questions, and this one is the one that's used most often during Problem Gambling Awareness Month. Sometimes you might see this prefaced with a question like in advance, like have you ever gambled in the past 5 years or have you gambled at all in the past 12 months? So people might ask that before asking these questions. But they're all in the past 12 months. Have you become restless or irritable when trying to cut down? Have you tried to keep your family or friends from knowing how much you've gambled? And have you ever had financial trouble that you've tried to get help with living expenses? And just a yes to any one of these really prompts further assessment. The lie bet is the shortest, briefest questionnaire evidence-based screening tool that you can incorporate. Again, this is going just beyond asking a yes or no closed-ended question, do you gamble? But have you ever felt the need to bet more and more money? Have you ever had to lie to people important to you about how much you've gambled? And again, a yes to one of these questions, further assessment is recommended. This one is a little bit longer. It's 9 questions, a problem gambling severity index. It's also used on our Help Seeker website as the self-assessment. So if people scan the QR code, if they go to our website, however, and they Help Seeker website and they click self-assessment, this is the questions that they're going to be answering. So have you ever bet more than you really could afford to lose? When you gambled, did you go back another day to try to get the money you lost? Have people criticized you or told you that you've had a problem, whether you thought it was true or not? And so people are going to answer never, sometimes, most of the time, or almost always to these 9 questions, and then they're going to be able to get a score at the end. And so the scoring is like this. So if they answer none, like to all of the questions, it's no problem with gambling. 1 or 2 is considered low risk with few problems or no identified negative consequences. 3 to 7 is moderate risk, and 8 or more is high risk. So regardless, after we do a screening, right, we want to talk to people about maybe why we've done this screening, and I'll get into some tips for ways to keep gambling responsible. Um, but it's just a way to really kind of have this conversation. And again, these questions aren't specific to the type of gambling, right? It's really based on that definition of wagering something of value on an unknown outcome. It's not saying, have you ever played bingo too much, right? It's asking if you've ever gambled. So the brief adolescent gambling screen is the research was done on those 12 to 19 years old. And again, it's asking about in the past 12 months, and it's using a Likert scale to come up with, so it's not just yes, more assessment. Although I would say, if there's a yes, then why not more assessment, right? I'm down for more questions. A score for a higher might indicate problems with gambling, but it's geared towards adolescents, right? Have you ever skipped hanging out with friends who do not gamble or bet to hang out with friends who do gamble or bet? And then have you ever felt you might have a problem? And have you ever hidden your gambling or betting from parents, family members, or teachers? And so what if they decline screening or they're just telling you no, 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 no? Well, you might be able to have one of these posters. So this here on the left is a flyer size version where it's just an 8 by 11. You could print it out yourself. We can mail you copies if you're running low on ink. Um, but it has a lie bet questionnaire on there. Have you ever felt the need to bet more and more money? And have you ever lied to people about how much you gamble? And then the QR code again takes you to the Problem Gambling Severity Index. That's our self-assessment on our Help Seeker website. And on the right there is the website and just kind of like what it looks like when you get to the self-assessment. It also reminds people to call 1-800-GAMBLER. There's free confidential help 24/7. They can also be connected to one of our peers 24/7. So just another great tool. You can also order this in a poster version, like we have it a little bit larger. We laminate it, we can drop it off. Just a great way for people to maybe take that screen themselves. So a little bit about gaming. So internet gaming disorder is not currently recognized by the DSM, but it is recognized by the World Health Organization. So it's currently under further consideration here in the United States. But this condition does not include general use of the internet, online gambling, or social media. And this is a proposed criteria. For gambling, you need 4, and we're going to get into that. But I just want to touch on this. But it's a preoccupation, tolerance. We see maybe some signs of withdrawal, but we're just engaging in the activity despite ongoing negative consequences. So the condition can also be for gaming alone, or on the internet with others. I see. Is there a question?
We can hold those till the end of
Oh,
the presentation if that helps.
okay. And this is a gaming disorder test. A tentative cutoff is five for recommended for a gaming disorder. But it's just acting, having difficulties controlling my gaming activity. And again, gaming despite negative consequences. Game quitters. Cam Adair is a person in gaming recovery, and he shares his story and also has a great website with a wealth of information. And if you're interested in, again, in a self-screening, here's a link for a test for parents if you're concerned about your loved one's gaming, or if you're concerned about your own gaming. And so what's also included in this presentation today is a screening guide that I developed for the center. And again, you really want to define gambling, provide some examples of what gambling is, and then incorporate an evidence-based screening tool. This guide also contains some tips for brief interventions, as well as some gambling-related questions that you could incorporate into a biopsychosocial assessment, as well as resources for help. So when it comes to diagnosing a gambling disorder, I love to point out that the people in the rooms knew that it was a problem before the psychiatric community. So Gamblers Anonymous was actually founded in 1957, and it wasn't recognized in the DSM until the third edition, and it was considered pathological gambling and remained under impulse control until 2013 when it was renamed and reclassified gambling disorder and is now considered a substance-related and addictive disorder. It is the only behavioral addiction in this category. And why? Well, addiction happens in our brain. It's about that dopamine, that pleasure center being rewarded. So win or lose, persons with a gambling disorder still feel that overwhelming craving to return to the casino and to get their fix. So we see here, the research shows that the gambling brain, right, with a win, right, wins feel good, right? It feels like we're happy if we've won. So that pleasure center, dopamine, all that is being activated in our brain. But even with a near miss, right, where we have these little intermittent maybe rewards, our brain, our pleasure center can still be activated. So if we think of like a slot machine where there's like a 7-7 and a cherry, oh, so close, right? There's still some pleasure happening in our brain even with a near miss. So to meet the criteria for a gambling disorder, again, this is not age-based. This is just based on clinical criteria. Um, if there's clinically significant impairment or distress, four or more for 12 months, not due to a manic episode, and there are specifiers and levels of severity. So four is for mild, um, and I think eight or nine is severe. So see lying to family members, right? They're trying to hide how much they're engaging in gambling, maybe how much money they've wagered or won or lost. And all that lying, of course, is going to jeopardize our relationships with others, maybe impact our job functioning, showing up to school, meeting deadlines. We might rely on others to get out of a desperate financial situation. So if you're constantly being asked to borrow money, you might want to check in with someone and see what maybe is a situation there. They're often preoccupied with gambling. So persistent thoughts and reliving those gambling experiences, planning the next venture, particularly with sports betting, cryptocurrency, and the other ways to wager online. Again, you might see persons on their phone maybe even more often than they used to be. There's also signs of tolerance and withdrawal, which is another reason why it was reclassified as a substance-related and addictive disorder, is that people need to gamble with more and more money to get that same desired excitement. So that dollar scratch off is not getting the juices going anymore, right? I need to a $5, a $10, a $20 scratch off. And it can show up that way at the casino, right? We're doing buy-ins, $5 buy-ins and maybe $20 buy-ins. Now $100, maybe I'm $100 on two different hands, right? It can increase, increase, increase. And then the withdrawal, right? They're making those repeated unsuccessful attempts to try to cut back or stop their gambling and are feeling restless or irritable when making those attempts, or when they're maybe just not able to engage in gambling. We see signs of escape, right? So people use gambling the way they do, drugs and alcohol, to kind of relieve their feelings when they're feeling depressed, anxious. This can be also a high risk indicator if people are gambling when they're under financial stress. And then what's unique to gambling is that persons chase their losses, so they're returning the next day to try to get even. So a lot of similarities, right? Again, why it was reclassified as a substance and addictive disorder is that preoccupation, tolerance and withdrawal, loss of control. It's going to imp have an impact on our um, overall health. We lie to conceal behavior. It's going to have a negative impact on major life areas. There's also 12-step self-help support groups as well as smart recovery, right? Celebrate recovery. And then that familial involvement, right? So gambling is just like all addictions is going to impact those that are closest to them, family members, friends, employers, loved ones. But there's some major differences, right? There's a lot more fantasies of success. People, again, have that mistaken belief of I'm going to turn this $20 into my mortgage payment, or my next vacation. Sorry for that. There's a lot less resources available. Currently in Maryland, there's only 16 in-person meetings, and I just heard from someone in Virginia that there's only two in person in their whole state, and they're a much larger state than we are. But with the blessing of COVID, right, where there's a lot more virtual options. So people can actually go to a Gamblers Anonymous or some type of gambling support meeting 24/7, almost anywhere in the world. There's a lot more powerful sense of shame and guilt. It's a lot easier to hide. If it can seem like a money problem, but gambling is not a problem with money, but it does become a money problem. So it's a lot easier to hide. There's nothing that I can smell on someone's breath. There's no marks that I can see, because there's no ingestion required. So there's no risk of overdose. So I like to say, if the casinos were to set a limit on how much you could wager in a day, it's something astronomical like $5 million, whereas there's no way you could put that amount of money of drugs or alcohol into your body without it shutting down. So as long as a person has access to money, they can continue to harm themselves. There's no risk of overdose. They're going to just continue to harm themselves by creating more and more debt. There's more financial problems related to this, more family anger, right? I don't understand why you can't just stop, right? There's a stigma has really decreased with substances because we understand maybe there's a chemical change happening, but we can't see that chemical change happening when no one's putting anything into their body. We don't realize that this is happening in our brain. So there's a lot more denial and defenses. And then again, a lot less public awareness that, again, that this could be lethal, that people might kill themselves over this. They might think that they're worth more dead than alive. Uh, oh, good. So I got plenty of time. So I want to share, well, look, can I just quickly answer the question real quick?
Yes, I think it was more of a comment, but please feel
Oh,
free.
okay.
Yeah.
Uh, so I guess my loop being EMS with the really big issue for. Yeah, so what we're hearing now, a lot of our helpline calls, from what I hear from our peers, a lot of parents are calling in. I think the youngest was maybe 12 or 15 that a parent was calling about, but parents are also calling about their adult children, right? They might be 32 and still living at home. I'm also hearing, I work with a client whose husband has disordered gambling, but her kids are involved in sports, and she shared with me, we were at an event and all these kids were on their phone and they were gambling. They're not 18, they're not 21. How are they engaging in gambling? It's because their parents are setting accounts up for them and not realizing the harm that can come with gambling. So there might be a bigger issue on the horizon. So thank you for that question slash comment. Um, so this is Winning Back My Life. So I'm going to share Rob's story, but you can go online here. You can watch it in full. I think it's about 40 minutes if you were to watch the entire docu-series. But you can also watch them separately. So what I'm going to show you here today is Rob's story. Oops. So as a high schooler, he started gambling on games with his buddies for fun, and when he graduated from fantasy leagues to online sports betting, his life and promising college career quickly began to unravel.
I'm Rob, I'm 25 years old, and this is my story. Growing up, my friends and I loved to watch sports. Be hanging out with friends at 7 because that's when the baseball game would start. No matter what the event was, we were watching a game. Same with my family. It was always present in my life. Family events would start at 1 on a Sunday for the football kickoff. And when I was 18 and I found out about daily fantasy sports, it was a no-brainer that I was going to get involved with it.
Maryland's Attorney General wants lawmakers to take a closer look at daily fantasy sports games.
But to the extent that I got involved with it, became a problem very quickly. So my friends and I would meet up, we'd be watching the game, we'd have our money on the contests, and it'd be fun. But then at 10 o'clock when that game would end, they'd go to sleep. Win or loss, they didn't care. I did. If I had won money, I wanted to win more. If I had lost money, I wanted to get it back right away. Being an 18-year-old, I didn't have a super high-paying job, so at the time, the idea that I could make money with gambling, it made me so excited, and it made me feel like I absolutely had to keep going. So I got into a good school, and I went down to Washington, D.C. to start my college career when I was 18, but very quickly, I stopped caring about the classes, and I cared about gambling. I'd moved from daily fantasy sports to actually sports betting by this point, and things were a bit of a roller coaster. There were days where I would win money, but of course more days where I would lose money. And where things really began to deteriorate for me was when UMBC upset Virginia in the March Madness tournament that year.
UMBC makes history!
They were the 16 seed and they beat the 1 seed. It was the first time that it ever happened in the tournament's history, and I didn't have a bet on the game. The only thing that might be worse than losing a bet as a problem gambler is not gambling on a game that you would have won. The frustration that I felt from not having money on that game led me to take all the credit that I had with my bookie at the time and put it onto UMBC's next game versus Kansas State, which they, of course, lost.
The history makers are eliminated.
And it was the first time that I was finding myself on a downward trend significantly enough that there was strong financial pressure on me to win my way out of the situation. I was 18 years old, and then for the very first time I found myself in debt that I couldn't dig my way out of on a exhibition spring training baseball game. The things that I was gambling on shifted from the games that I loved to watch with my friends to anything that was on TV. And that pattern would play itself out for the next 4 years following that. I would find myself in debt 6 times over the course of 6 total years gambling that I had to work a second job to dig myself out because I was down so much that I couldn't even see a way to bet my way out of the situation. Things really came to a peak for me on November the 12th of 2022. I would spend 12 hours that day on a gambling binge at a casino and also on my phone, to the extent that I ended up losing enough money that I took 3 cash advances on my credit card, maxing it out, and finding myself working for the next 6 months to follow for 70 to 80 hours a week to pay off that debt. That was the last day that I gambled, because I was standing there in the bathroom of that casino counting the money that I had left, and I thought to myself, I really hope I didn't drop any of this money in my panicked haze of that day. Then I thought, I might as well have dropped that money since I was going to go out and lose it anyway playing table games, poker, and chasing it with sports bets. That was the first time during that 6-year span with gambling that I recognized that I was never going to make money gambling. But it took me a lot of ups and downs to come to that realization. Following that day, I got myself some help. I started going to support group meetings, and it really began to make a difference in my life to add financial controls and just find some other things to do. But I didn't know quite what I wanted to do. It would turn out that a month later, when a friend of mine stopped coming to our support group meetings, I would realize what it is that gave me meaning in my life, that led me to feel passionate about my time. And I ended up telling him, hey, man, I don't know what the solution is, but I know it's not going back and gambling more. And something that I said clicked with him. He came back in, and that made me feel good for the first time in 6 years because I had finally done something that wasn't for myself, which led me to eventually begin creating content about my gambling addiction story and recovery journey to try to help other people avoid making the same mistakes with their life that I made with mine. Share this with your friends that gamble because we want to make sure that they're safe while they're doing it. Questions that you can ask yourself to determine if you have a gambling addiction? Let's answer them together. Don't let an early win convince you that you're always going to win. It's easy for me to say that if you have a problem, you should seek help, but I think that a step that is more tangible to make is that if you feel like you have a problem, tell someone about it. Because if you keep it to yourself, it begins to fester and grow. You might know that you have a problem and you might not be ready to seek help today, but if someone else knows that you're going through the situation, those conversations are going to start to flow, and eventually you're going to find yourself getting the help that you need.
Thanks, Rob. I think I saw. Yeah, wow, right? Powerful story. Yeah. So start the conversation, right? We want to, you know, listen non-judgmentally, really understand how is this behavior maybe benefiting them? What kind of things are they getting out of it? How is it maybe harming them? Meet them where they're at in their readiness for help. Maybe they're not sure that they have a problem, and it's okay if they're not ready yet, but let's keep having the conversation. You can use motivational interviewing techniques. Ask open-ended questions using positive affirmations. Um, Listen reflectively, reframe or rephrase kind of what they're telling you. You can also use a readiness or a confidence ruler, maybe to say, hey, how ready do you think you are to make this next step? How confident do you feel that you're able to make this change? And just reassure that you're willing to help, that support and counseling is available. Oh, some other tips to speaking to youth. Um, we want to start as early as possible. Start middle school age or earlier. Remind them that it's not legal and there's some consequences. I didn't go into it here, but our prevention manager has all those details. But sometimes parents can face consequences, right? Because they're underage. So have the conversation multiple times. The earlier you start talking about gambling, or the earlier that you start engaging in gambling, the more likely it will be a problem in your life. So we want to try to prevent that by having the conversation sooner. And we want to do it like we talk about drugs or alcohol or sex, right? There's driving, right? There's risks to everything that we do in life. When I've done presentations with the peers, I've heard clients say life is a gamble. Yeah, things that we do are risky. But when we're talking about gambling here, we're talking about risking something of value like money or property on an unknown outcome. So we want to model healthy behaviors, maybe talk to kids about finances, like understand risk reward. If we risk this amount and there's this percentage of a reward, are we willing to risk it? Like gambling isn't risk-free. How does gambling relate to finances, spending and saving money? That the industry is really in the business to make money. They're responsible to have some responsible gaming messaging, right? And to put the 800 gambler number up there. But again, as long as you can have access to money and they're not necessarily going to stop you from getting more money, um, you can continue to harm yourself. Sports and gambling don't have to go together. Listening to Rob's story, a lot of times people with sports betting, sometimes it's hard to watch a game without something on the line or vice versa. So these things don't have to go together. And I heard there was a lot of advertising, especially during the Super Bowl this year, for wagering on sports. It became legal in 2018, and it's just kind of popped up state by state. And I think about 39 states, including Washington, D.C., now have some form of legal sports betting. So there's a lot more advertising. So these are teachable moments. These are times to have conversations, especially if you do watch sports together as a family. You know, I'm kind of upset that there's no regulation on this because sporting events should be family events. And if we're not allowed, or if the industry is not allowed to advertise to youth, then they shouldn't be allowed to advertise during sporting events. But these are teachable moments. These are times to maybe have the conversation. There's also, again, materials. Oh, and I just wanted to say too, like, parents, like, just talk to parents. Like, these are tips for really parents, for anyone here, right, to have conversations with youth. But if we're not educating parents on some of these consequences and harms, they're not going to know that there's consequences and harm. So they may create a betting account for their child and not understand. They may give their child even a credit card to play video games, right? And then before you know it, you see a $500 charge on your credit card from Xbox, and what happened here? Have the conversation, talk to people about the risk and reward. Again, there's free materials. The center, everything that we do here at the center is free. So if you need some materials, we have wallet size cards, flyers, posters, almost anything that you need. Please give us a shout out. This is our turtle card. So this is a wallet size card that you can order. And so it shares on there what is low risk gambling. So, we don't want to use money we can't afford to lose. Or I'm sorry, only money that we can afford to lose, right? The money that we're going to go out to the restaurant with. We know we're going to lose that money on food, right? So what can we afford to lose in gambling? Do it in a social setting that it's a form of recreation. And it can be high risk if we're coping with anger, loneliness, depression, if we're under financial stress, recovering from a mental health or substance use disorder, under the influence of alcohol or other drugs, or if we're under the legal age to gamble. And then on the other side of this business card, just reminds you to keep it fun and problem free, to set a limit, to know how much money and time that you're going to spend, know how the game works, and try to balance this with other leisure activities. And if you feel like it's becoming a problem, take a break. Give 1-800-GAMBLER a call. So these are our peers. We have currently 4 peers that cover the entire state of Maryland. And they are a great resource to get someone connected to a GA meeting if they wanted to ban themselves, and I'll get into that. Um, our peers also in-house created a video sharing some of their experiences and their journey to recovery. It also includes our Get the Facts. So I also have a link for the Get the Facts campaign that we did. So you may have seen some of that here in black, right on the left of the video. 20% of people with a gambling problem file for bankruptcy. There was like 1 in 6 attempt suicide. And so we had these Get the Facts. You may have seen them on billboards, bus stops, buses. Um, Hopefully you've seen them, but so we did a campaign on that as well. We also have a help seeker page that is dedicated to young adults. So there's self-assessment for parents as well on there. And then we also have no cost treatment. So if you or a family member, so this is available to anyone that is impacted by gambling related harms. Counseling is available to any Maryland resident at no cost, regardless of their insurance or ability to pay. These are just some resources on problematic gaming. Um, Delaware has a gaming website. Reboot and Recover is Dr. Stephanie Diaz. She has some resources on there. There's Gamers Anonymous and Game Quitters, as I mentioned in the presentation. There's also the voluntary exclusion program. So if persons are considering ways to reduce their harm, they may consider banning themselves. So one of our peers calls it the anabuse for gamblers. So, with anabuse, people are prescribed that. So if they drink alcohol, they're going to have this consequence of feeling very sick. So if people ban themselves, they actually, if they enter the casino, they could be charged with criminal trespassing, and any money that they have could be confiscated and then distributed to the problem gambling fund. So some ban themselves, right? And then still sneak into the casino. I hear stories from the peers like, oh, they only caught me when I've won, which might be true, right? Because you're not going to maybe signal someone that you're there. They don't always check ID when you go into a casino. And I'm just giving that as an example. Um, but when you win, right, now you have to show your ID. And now, oh, I can say, oh, you're on this list. You actually shouldn't be here. So it's a minimum of 2 years, so people can actually check 2 years or a lifetime, but you have to request removal. Um, the counseling is free to any Maryland resident, but the Lottery and Gaming Commission makes that final decision about if you can be removed from the list. And that's for now, again, casinos, lottery, bingo hall, sports betting, and fantasy sports. And I also just remind people that if they are banning themselves from sports betting, you are also essentially banning yourselves from I'm sorry, 5 of the 6 casinos that also have sports betting. So you're not just blocking yourself from mobile sports betting, you're blocking yourself from all sports betting. But you can also download this technology. So if you're interested in blocking any online gambling, which would include sports betting, you can download Gamban or Bet Blocker. Gamban does have a subscription fee. I think it's about $40 a year, where Bet Blocker is free. But all you have to do is once you reach out to them, you have to just download the thing that they give you, and then it will block all those gambling websites, legal and illegal. There's also TrueLink, which has been around to help families manage the spending of their loved ones. Originally was created for those working with vulnerable elders or persons with disabilities, but it can be a great resource for caregivers and their families to kind of create some spending rules. Like you can take out money at this time at this location, but not at this time and not at this location. So you can kind of block some type of purchase, some various different purchases, but also block purchases at bars, liquor stores, and gambling in casinos. The National Helpline has just converted to 1-800-MY-RESET, but 1-800-GAMBLER is the Maryland helpline. These are just some national resources. If you're interested, again, Gamblers in Recovery and Recovery Road offer online and virtual meetings. National Council has, if you're interested in other state resources, 988, of course, call, text that if you are in crisis, or you can text home to 741-741. And then Gam-Anon is that 12-step meeting for family members and loved ones. Here's our 2 main websites, our Help Seeker website and our main website. We also work with Parents Place of Maryland and Maryland Coalition of Families for the family members that are impacted by gambling. We also work with Maryland Council on problem gambling for faith-based advocacy and assistance, legal services, credit counseling. And then if you're not familiar with Cash Campaign of Maryland, I probably need to create a whole slide just for them because they're so great. They stand for Creating Assets, Savings, and Hope. And they actually work with Maryland residents that have an income of, I think, 70,000 or below. That's their low income requirement for taxes. So if you need tax prep services or even back taxes up to 3 years, if you are making 70,000 or below, you are eligible for that free service. They also have financial coaching and will help persons determine if they're eligible for up to 22 Maryland public benefits. That could be income based, but it could also be, I mean, I know this is for youth, but it could also be for seniors, right? So 55, 60, 65, depending on the program, you could see if you're eligible for those public benefits. Always, we can connect with you. Please use us as a resource. Like if you're not sure, we're doing this screening and I don't know what to do, reach out to us. We also have case consultation calls 4 times a month on Zoom. So you can go online and just register for whatever day of the week. I think they're usually at 12 o'clock, so they're usually at a lunchtime. Again, we have free peer support. They're also not only able to provide one-on-one support, but if you had a group that you were interested on having them come in and kind of share their story, again, free treatment for Maryland residents. If you need any assistance with that, I oversee that directory. Free awareness materials, and then of course 1-800-GAMBLER. I just want to leave this up here real quick so you guys can scan that. Please join our mailing list. You'll get updates about all those free trainings with CEUs. We do CEUs for psychologists, professional counselors, social work, addiction counselors and professionals. We're also certified for the international gambling certification if anyone is interested in that. And then occasionally we have peer CEUs. Well, I'm glad I got a wow out of Angela about the thank you guys so much. Any other questions?
Actually, yes, I can help facilitate some of the Q&A portion of the session. There were a couple questions put in here.
Okay.
Are there any statistics on an increase in gambling addictions? Is the treatment more tailored now for gambling addiction since the ability to gamble is so accessible now?
What was the first part of the question?
Are there any statistics on an increase related to an increase in gambling addictions?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, just yeah, from our prevalence study, right? In 2022, we saw 4% of Marylanders had gambling disorder, and that's increased to 5.7 now. So definitely. Research, I mean, they always go with CBT. I see a lot more motivational interviewing as far as what treatment modalities, but I always encourage providers, like, you want to do what works best for you. Like, don't try to do CBT if that's not your type of therapy. And then also what works well for the client. So, just have conversations about money, though, is what's going to happen is because financial restitution is often a part of gambling recovery.
And then there's a follow-up question. Are there any statistics on the numbers of teenagers with gambling addictions? I think you might have mentioned some of that.
Yeah, that youth risk behavior study asked questions about gambling. And so, yeah, we see about 18% of high school students have gambled. Our prevalence study doesn't look at that only because the legal age of gambling is 18. Oh, I just, here's ways you can connect with us. I'll put that on the Facebook, Instagram. Oh, I would probably, that's my communications manager needs to change it to X. YouTube and LinkedIn. And then also BHIPP, BHIPP, sorry.
Well, thank you. And thank you again for this wonderful presentation and to our participants for today's session. The recording for today's session, the PowerPoint slides, and the list of related resources will be available on our website next week in the training library. We'll send the CME and CEU certificates to participants by Friday, February 13th. Please remember to take the post-evaluation survey as you exit, or it will be sent over email as well, as this is required for you to receive CME or CEU certificates. Stay tuned for future BHIPP trainings by following us on social media. And I'll just leave it open in case people have additional questions or anything like that. Thank you again for this wonderful presentation and all the resources.
Absolutely. Thank you all. Thank you all for your feedback. Thank you